Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I hope everyone is doing okay this morning. It is 6:38 in the a.m. I could not sleep, so I just decided to come on and do the news. The very first show is not really news per se. The very first show is kind of slightly responding to criticism, but explaining my disposition. And I'm going to make the argument that I'm right, and I'm going to back that argument up. This is in response to the Scottish National Party video. The Scottish National Party walked out of Prime Minister questions. And in my video, I made the point that this was theater. Let's take a look at this. And at the end of this, and let me check my volume before I do anything else. Always check your volume. Always check your volume. I am going to offer any Scots that would like to call into the show to call in and make their case. If they still feel that I am wrong in my assessment. And I'm going to read some of the feedback on that video because I thought the feedback was awesome. One guy was like, Jamal is usually on point, but he's way off on this one. But just so people know what I'm talking about, this was the video. So early in the day, Theresa May was getting zinged by Jeremy Corbyn, hitting her on the Boris Johnson thing, because Boris Johnson essentially said that he wanted some more like Trump running the Brexit negotiations. Not to mention he was admitting it essentially all sorts of chaos was going to be taking place during those negotiations. I'm sorry, I'm being hoarse. I haven't been to bed yet. My wife is she does like sitting for coding or something to that effect. And I'm sitting on the couch. And so at that point I was like, yeah, might as well just get up to the news. But forgive me, I'm slightly hoarse. But he had been hitting her all day with zingers, or I should say in the PMQs. And the very first opener, he hit her with this thing about Boris Johnson, and she gave him a look that could have cut glass. I wish I had the video queued up. I would show it. It is absolutely awesome. It was one of the best videos of the day. It's one of those videos that you save and you look at when you need to feel happy and need to be cheered up. But in this case, let me show you what I mean. SNP walks out. And let's flip this over. Come on. There we are.
Minister gave a commitment that she would treat Scotland as part of a union of equals. Yet.
Wait 1 second. Something is going on with the mic volume. Oh, I see. Hold on, guys. There we are.
Yet last night, she pressed ahead with a power grab in direct opposition to Scotland's elected Parliament. The Prime Minister silenced Scotland's voice, while the Prime Minister now commit to bringing forward emergency legislation so that the will of the Scottish Parliament can be heard and, more importantly, respected.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that we do expect that the outcome, and it will happen, that the outcome of the whole process of Brexit is going to be a significant increase in Holyrood's decision-making power. It is not the case that this is in any way a power grab.
But Mr. Speaker, under the circumstances, given the disrespect that's shown, I have got no option but to ask that this House now sits in private.
I'm not hearing that at this time, and I'm not obliged to do so, is my clear understanding. Order, the Honourable Gentleman. Order! The right Honourable Gentleman can resume his seat. I'll happily take advice, but I don't think I'm obliged to hear that at this time. We could have the vote now, but we could have a vote now, or it could be taken at the end. If the Honourable Gentleman wishes to indicate a desire to conduct such a a vote now, so be it. Right. There can be a division, and it will be at the end of this session, not now. That is the end of the matter. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, might I ask...
No, I'm not debating. No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. I'm telling you that there can be a vote at the end of this session and not now, in light of the persistent and repeated refusal of the right honourable gentleman to resume his seat when so instructed. I order the right honourable gentleman to withdraw immediately from the House for order for the remainder of this day's sitting. Very well. Very well. Very well.
Defend national liberation.
Okay, with the amount of people leaving, it feels like one of my after-dinner speeches.
All right, so that's a snapshot. I mean, it was a little bit longer in the back and forth, but that's fundamentally what took place. So let me start at a particular point. And in fact, let me hit the criticism on my other video, just so you see where I'm coming from. Let's push this over and let's show that part. Let's do a flip. Right. Scotland has more independence from the UK than any state in America has. They have their own parliament, legal system, separate police force. Okay, that one doesn't sound like a critique. I don't think Jamal reads the comments. May has an election in 2017 because she wanted to lose. She wanted to trigger another referendum on Brexit. She didn't quite manage to lose. All the wrangling is about reversing Brexit. I do read the comments. Clearly, I do read the comments. I don't always get to respond because I do live shows, so I always figure just people just respond from that way. I'm Scottish, and I don't know where to start with this video. It is so wrong. Normally like Jamal, bit of a letdown. Oh God, I got to be honest. This one bit a little bit, but you don't explain what I got wrong. That's the part that always gets me. Jamal, you got to check out the Maida SNP. Her Glasgowian accent is epic. I'm Scottish and I'm terrified of the SNP running my country. I'm Scottish and they aren't so swings roundabout, eh? I'm Scottish and I'm terrified of Westminster running my country. So the answer is to vote for another party in independent Scotland. What's your point? Not a huge number of comments. I think maybe we should have a parliamentary system. Maybe. At the very least, it would be easier to get other parties in the process. Seed, Scott, and seed. I like that one. I think the one that bit was more so the one that I got it so wrong that I let him down. I don't like to let people down. So I'm gonna make my point. I made my biggest point in this video was this was theater. That they were exploiting this Brexit in order to get what they wanted out of the process. The SNP being to leave the UK. Blackford here, when he did that, he did what he did. Now, just to make my point, just to make my argument, I would say politics, some of it, goes beyond nationalities, cultures, and all this other stuff. And the key premise that I go by is that people do what they need to do to try to get what they want to get. And they come up with certain behaviors and certain things that they say in order to try to get a particular view across, their own particular narrative of events across. One of these things has to do with, what are you trying to accomplish? He wants to leave the European Union. What is the powers at his disposal to pull that off? Well, you have Brexit going on right now at this very moment. And does it make more sense, yes or no, that he will go about it in a way to try to exploit the fact that Brexit is going on, especially if he can get either more powers or create some kind of fervor to generate some kind of support for another referendum to try to get Scotland out of the UK. Look, even in the best of societies, theater is part of it. It has to be part of it. If you're trying to get your narrative across, you are trying to get those things across to the public in a way that they can understand. And you want people to be on your particular wavelength as you go about your affairs to try to get that across. Now, in this situation, if you were the SNP and you wanted to leave the UK, what would you do to leave the UK? What are the powers at your disposal to leave the UK, or at the very least create this kind of a ruckus in order to pull this off? And if this is a power grab, and then kind of throwing down the gauntlet where you end up getting kicked out of the EU Parliament, and he's saying there are going to be more disruptions later on, it sounds like this is a bit of theater. Now, understand what I'm saying here. Make a distinction between whether or not it's theater and whether or not they have a valid case. Those things are different. There is a distinction in those things. Just because you may be putting on theater doesn't necessarily mean that you're not putting on theater for good reason. The very fact that it's theater doesn't necessarily negate the argument that you're taking place. I may be a drama queen about something, but hey, maybe I'm being a drama queen for an actual good cause. The very fact that the person is being a drama queen doesn't necessarily mean that the person is essentially doing a bad thing or doing it for bad ends. I think you guys took it as if I was devaluing the position of the people who want to leave, and I'm not. As an African American in this country, I am fixed in a particular point in time, and I have a certain disposition and a certain perspective of the world. To some degree, that perspective is going to kind of correlate with people similar to me, and it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same. I'm somewhat of an oddball, but many of my perceptions are going to be that of my group because we have somewhat of a similar experience. Well, this is replicated from Hispanics, from, I would imagine, LGBTQ community, and I would say I know that because I've seen this kind of like community in and of itself. I guess I'm making the point that the experiences of each of these people are valid. It's not a situation where one can negate the other. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet eating her curds away. Along came a spider, sat down beside her, and frightened Miss Muffet away. Now, what is the perspective of the spider in this situation? And is the perspective of the spider wrong? Is Little Miss Muffet's perspective wrong? Neither one of their perspectives is wrong. Both of their perspectives are valid. Now, whether or not one, overreacted, the other may say that. But is that true as an absolute? Not so much. Both perspectives are valid. This is a long way to get around to the point of, I don't live in Scotland, but I'm not necessarily negating the perspective of the SNP or Scots who support these guys. My thing was twofold. A, it's theater. It being theater doesn't necessarily negate their position. It just means that he's throwing somewhat of a fit, and he's doing this for political effect. It's no different than if, somebody is, for example, Rand Paul shut the government down in a filibuster. Now, he shut it down because he wanted to try to force a vote on the war movement. He's being a drama queen, but he's being a drama queen and he's putting on political theater because he wants to draw attention to the fact that we're spending a huge amount of money invading other countries. Not to mention, this is being done extra constitutionally, essentially against the law, especially when you're talking about Syria and Yemen and Libya and all these other countries. Yes, it's political theater, but yes, it's for good effect. What his position is actually right in this case. So I don't have this belief that just because it's political theater means it's wrong. I'm made twofold. Yes, it's political theater, which I think is true. But also, look, this is me in Scotland. I'm even wearing a kilt. You can question where I'm going commando or not. I heard real Scots always go commando. You never wear a kilt with underwear under them. It's supposed to be, less of a man to do so. So wearing this kilt, imagine for the moment I'm wearing this kilt when I say this. I'm not wearing a kilt, but you can imagine it. I'm trying to get in touch with my Scottish part. I don't have any Scottish parts. But I'm trying to make this point. I made the argument that Scotland should stay in the UK. My thing is, what do you expect to get out of leaving the UK? I guess that's what the point it boils down to. And does being a smaller nation, this kind of little island, as George Galloway said, do you really want to break up that unit of sorts? And what are you going to get out of it that you don't necessarily have in it? Now, I know some people would say, well, you get more powers of the government and everything else. Fair enough. I guess my thing is, I don't see the benefit of leaving the UK. And maybe that's what I'm missing the boat on. But nevertheless, if there are Scottish callers who would like to set me straight on this, I am all ears for the explanation of why Scotland should leave the UK. I understand that some of the SNP really wants to stay in the European Union. I think that is insane. Are you really going to run that welfare state under the UK or under the European Union? Not being able to run deficits, I just think is a lunacy. I think you get more powers, or you're probably much better off or much better served in the UK. But again, I'm open for mind change on this part. But I do want to make the point that me calling it theater is true. It is theater. And as for whether or not it's right or wrong to leave, I think that's to some degree subjective. I mean, the question becomes, where does that subjectivity intercede with objective reality? Meaning, at the point where predictions are made from the standpoint of leaving the UK, I guess that's where it intercedes with reality. I haven't really made any predictions on it. My main thing is, what do you get out of leaving that you don't necessarily have in? And are you better off there as opposed to ferreting it out alone as a small country? And so, let's see. For fuck's sake, Scotland wants what EU wants, so they want to be a part of the EU. I understand they want to be a part of the EU, but Scotland is also, if I'm not mistaken, a welfare state, and Scotland's budgets is going to be under the same constraints that all these other nations are going to be under, for saying like the Greeks or any other nation that wants to run deficits. If they want to support that welfare state, they are going to be under austerity, just like the other nations were put under austerity by Germany. They're going to be under the thumb of Brussels and the conservative government in Berlin. Tell me where I'm wrong. The EU wants Scotland's oil reserves. Burn bookholds. If the Tories stay in power, they would be better off alone. Here's the other point, right? If SNP leaves, if I'm not mistaken, Scotland tends to trend more towards the lefty side of the map of the realm. If they leave, does the Parliament become more heavily influenced by the Tories? That chills me to the bone, if I'm being honest. But I could be wrong. If Scotland was so great, why did Scrooge McDuck have to come all the way to America to make his fortune? Checkmate. Unlikely ally. Make America great again. That's like pretty fucking funny. Ian was like, it's an outrage. He says a power grab. It's a power grab. Let's see, Jamal, the only trend left because of the SNP, the other parties are more conservative. So I do watch every so often Scotland's First Minister questions. Yeah. I mean, even using this thing of immigration to try to whoop up support. Yeah. I don't know enough about it to say much. What will be the pros and cons? John B. Murder. the R rolls trip me out. It's a power grab. I've been practicing my Scottish accent. It's awesome. So the pros and cons. I got to be honest. I am not all that well versed. I've heard debates on it, but some of the arguments go along with this idea that they can access their energy resources in a better way that they don't think they can necessarily do with the UK, or they believe that they are better served accessing those things and they can like be living on a sea of oil in this kind of way. Apparently Scotland has oil reserve or energy reserves that are untapped. But that's temporary. I mean, they don't. You're not gonna have infinite oil. Like I understand. Yeah, I'm curious about somebody calling in on this one. Hey, Scotland, at least you're not Puerto Rico, Mr. Miles. That's true. Essentially a colony of the United States, that the United States essentially that take a hit and pretended as if it didn't exist and then lied about the number of people that died there. Yeah, at least you're not Puerto Rico. I thought the people of Scotland wanted to stay in the EU. Luca, they do want to stay in the EU, but the UK is coming out of the EU, which is why the SNP for the last year, every time they get to the mic in the dispatch box, have been screaming at the top of their lungs about being dragged out of the EU. It's almost like have you seen like a cat being taken back to the vet? And the cat is like literally grabbing onto any and everything that it can get his claws into, including the vet that's dragging it back. And it's the saddest sight, the screeching and everything else. That's what they put you in mind of the SNP. Every time Ian gets up to the dispatch box and a gentleman before Ian, it will be something about that. The Scots want to stay in the EU. Fair enough. Now here's one of the other problems. When the UK comes out of the EU, some of the regulations that the UK can pass may gut the regulations that the EU have implemented. Maybe. By the same token, if Labour gets in power, meaning Jeremy Corbyn may be able to fit it. The left-wing argument for this is Greece. Essentially, this idea that Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't be able to initiate what he wants for the British government if they were still under the thumb of Berlin. This kind of goes to this thing of Scotland also. This idea of Scotland wanting to remain in the EU as if Scotland is going to have any level of sovereignty by remaining in the EU. I think that's insane. I mean, that makes no sense. It's like, we want to get out of the UK because we want our sovereignty, but we want to jump into the EU where we're going to immediately lose that same sovereignty. It makes no sense. Scott voted not to be independent because they promised the UK will stay in the EU, so essentially they were lied to. Fair enough. They weren't really lied to. I mean, it wasn't a situation where, they weren't lied to. I mean, no one in the UK government planned on the UK leaving, meaning Tories and Labour, and for the most part, the mainstream of the UK was for stay and remain. The government itself didn't lie to them because the government itself took the position of, we want to remain. The UK itself put it up to a vote, and it just so happened that they lost that vote. But it wasn't a situation where the government wanted to lose the vote. Like, it wasn't we're going to do this knowing full well that they weren't going to do it. I guess I'm making a distinction between a lie versus a change in just the priorities of the government itself. It wasn't something that the government wanted. It's something that the people chose. It's a difference in those things. Greece is not the richest country in Europe. Cause of the reserves in natural gas. That's why the crisis is about. Burn buckholds. No, you miss what I mean. When Greece was having the money issues, and the Syriza government ends up taking power. The Syriza government at one point was polling like the Green Party is polling in the United States. And they end up taking power. The people were that fed up with austerity, and they put it up to a referendum. Greece said, no, we don't want any more loans. We're not taking the plans to which you guys are trying to give us. And in this kind of resounding referendum, literally just utter democracy. And Brussels put screws to them. Now, if you can imagine if you're Britain and you're a Jeremy Corbyn type, and you see that, and you think to yourself, oh my God, if I tried to put through the plans that I wanted to put through Britain, I will be crushed in the same way that they were crushed. Jeremy Corbyn, there was a certain amount of political pressure that was put on Jeremy Corbyn to go for Remain, and so that's what he did. So yeah, Jamal, but at the same time, the Scottish referendum, there wasn't talk of having a referendum in the EU. Oh, that's true. That is true. That is very true. That is true. So you're trying to say, well, why did they have a referendum in the first place? Like, you had a referendum in Scotland. There was no talk of having a referendum in the UK, and all of a sudden they had a referendum. I still say that's a little different than lied to. I mean, I think, honestly, it's like if somebody said, look, Hillary Clinton is going to be president of the United States. Now, there's no way they can know that, but every poll, most polls, or most of the you could say the propaganda, had it that she was going to win. Is it a lie for a person to say that that's going to take place? And maybe that's a bad example. I'm using an example of Brexit to kind of put across the example of Hillary Clinton. In the same way that people thought Brexit wasn't going to take place, they didn't think Hillary Clinton was going to lose. In both cases, you can say it was a brick through the establishment's window. So, but nobody, I think, made bets on that. Well, people did make bets on that. People in the FBI. Yeah, man, that's a tough one. I don't know about that one. That's a good point. Greece is a valid point. On the other hand, the UK also runs on austerity. Yes, it does. They also don't allow Scotland to run much of a deficit. Fair point. Fair point. Fair point. Future called. Are you fucking kidding me? The EU is a German project. At first, they didn't even want to include Germany in the EU. Yeah, they might, but that's kind of besides the point. They did include Germany in the EU. Well, what they wanted to do is kind of besides the point. And also, do you honestly believe that Scotland is better served in the EU as opposed to the UK? I guess that's what I'm missing. Even if you say they're not necessarily allowed to run much of a deficit. But they're still allowed to do it. I just don't see how the fate of Scotland is improved going it alone in the UK. I mean, in the EU. That's all. That's my disconnect. Future call. Have you ever heard of Maserati? You mean the car? I've heard of the car. Forsaken Companion. It does to me. It seems more like those are issues they're focusing on, telling people, so they're afraid and want to leave. And I think the reasons, the powers, are economic. Jamal, leaving the EU makes UK poorer. Pound is already down. Yes, it does. So it'll be harder to run social programs. Some producers are already 50% more expensive. It's more expensive. Hey, so that's the other part, right? I about the UK. And this is why I say it's to some degree theater, and it's some degree the SNP taking advantage of the situation. It's at their weakest. I mean, Britain is taking a hit. Like, it's taking a significant hit. All of these people who are talking about Brexit as if it's going to be, you know, a rainbow in every pocket and a potato in every pot. Well, they're proven this is being proven to not be true. I mean, like you said, Britain is poor because of it to some degree. And you can imagine if Britain is poor to some degree because of it, maybe a line of attack is, hey, do you really want to put your lot in this sinking ship? And Britain said that we were going to stay in the EU, and they lied. Like, you could see that line of attack. But understand, just because the line of attack might be politically expedient, and you can even make a case that that line of attack might be right, it's still being exploited. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Now, the argument is, from the standpoint of objective reality, is Scotland better off in the EU? Or is it better off in the UK? How long has Scotland been associated with the UK? You guys have been together forever, in one way or another. I'm skeptical that association that you've had with Britain, you can call it a special relationship, is somehow going to either be replicated or you're going to be somehow better off. That's all. I'm just greatly skeptical. People are trying to accuse Germany for running the EU when they themselves don't get involved in politics. If you don't know what goes on in the EU, it's your fault for not informing yourself. Yeah, but come on. The EU has a bunch of unelected bureaucrats, and you are further away from the centers of power. I mean, I don't think people are insane if they're kind of making this point of, these guys are unelected. Like, your capacity to deal with what's taking place in the EU, especially from the standpoint of the people who are chosen to be president and everything else, you're bifurcated not just through your own government, but through another layer of governmental bureaucracy. I don't think people are insane for saying something about that. And just because you're paying attention to it doesn't necessarily mean you can have any effect on it. I mean, come on, be fair. Be fair. The Treaty of Maserati permitted the reunification of Germany under the condition that the reunified Germany adopted the euro as their currency. This was a French demand. You know the funny part about that, though? Germany ended up running that shit because Germany has an amazing economy, and that economy is pumping out cars and pumping out stuff to all of these other places. And because of the way the euro is arranged, those governments, countries, have been essentially devolved into something like states. So if Germany is pumping out all of this and is, let's say, pushing out all of this product, what are the other countries doing that are just buying those products? Like, you can imagine that if you have a situation where your country is not producing enough from a standpoint of an economic standpoint, the only thing the country can do is contract, because it has to run austerity in order to balance the budgets at that point. The euro thing is, it's always weird to me. States, for the most part, have to balance their budgets. But states are different than countries, and the regulatory demands from the standpoint of the United States is different than what it is for the euro. It's always weird to me. But the EU is also much bigger. Yes, multi-states are harder to corrupt by the single payer, like Branson or the UK Murdoch. That I don't agree. That part I don't agree. You believe that these unelected politicians are easier to corrupt, and you believe that your sovereignty is better ensured from unelected bureaucrats in the EU. I don't think so. I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I think you are further away from the centers of power than what you are in the UK. I think you are. In fact, you've I was almost there with you until you said that. You are right there associated with Britain, right there on the front lines when you're dealing with things from the standpoint of the British Parliament. That is not true in the EU. That's not true at all. Now, you may say that there are certain people in Britain that can be corrupted. Fair enough, but let's not be coy. The same thing can be true in the EU. What's his name? Martin Schulz. No, Juncker. What was the controversy with Juncker recently where he chose somebody to be in a particular position by elevating the guy twice, like in a heartbeat, and it pissed people off so much that you had people protesting what he was doing? It was either Juncker or Schulz. Corruption is corruption. I mean, you can't necessarily get away from it. But the difference of it is, from the standpoint of Britain, at the very least, you're there. You're in a position to call it out. You have representatives that are right there. The guy who got thrown out of Parliament. Good luck having that done in the EU. Good luck on that one. No, I'm saying because there's so many parties, it's harder to get a thing passed that only one EU part wants. So, for example, the Pirate Party has some sway in the EU, but none in the UK. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Has some in the EU, but none in the UK. Yeah. But see, here's the thing. Like in the United States, it's much harder to start parties. In the UK, that's not really true. I mean, George Galloway started the quote-unquote Respect Party and ends up winning his seat, beating out that woman for Labour. Question Time guy, I can't think of his name, gets pissy with George as soon as he wins on the election night and says, how does it feel to be the black woman for the seat? And George Galloway, and just all completely disrespectful. It's a funny interview, but brutally disrespectful. But I guess I'm making a point. There may be many parties in the EU, but many parties is not necessarily indicative of a more democratic process. The EU is fundamentally somewhat undemocratic, and it creates more of a layer between you and actual sovereignty. I guess that's what I'm getting at. In Britain, you are closer to that level of sovereignty than I think you are in the EU. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? What am I missing? The EU is like the house made of cake and Hansel and Gretel. Very inviting, but really bad for you. John B. That's hilarious. Blogo Pago. Protectionism lets countries stabilize and keep some self-reliance. To some degree, I agree. It depends on the degree of protectionism you're talking about. I mean, Trump just started a trade war. So there's that. China and the EU has started tariffs on goods in the countries to rebuff what Trump is doing. So there's that. I don't know how bad that's going to get. But we've been alienating, supposedly, our allies. I don't necessarily think that's helpful. I don't necessarily think this leads to anything major or substantial, but still, it's a little weird. And of all the issues and all the problems in the world, is putting a tariff on steel the thing to do? It's. I think I understand why Trump is doing it. He has no solutions to bringing back jobs. Zero. Because Republicans don't have solutions to stuff like that. The only solution that they ever have is tax cuts. The fact is, those tax cuts don't really work. Thank you for the money. I'm putting this in my pocket, or I'm putting it in the stock market. And research after the tax cut has shown that employers put that money in their pockets. They didn't give it to workers. They put it in their pockets. Here's the thing. If I need something, I may create a job. But the private sector only creates jobs if they can make a profit off the job. Their job is not to create jobs. Their job is to create profits. Just like McDonald's job is not to create hamburgers. This job is to make profit. The hamburger is the segue that it goes through in order to make that profit. It's like the stupid human trick that gets money back from whatever they're doing. It's lunacy to think that because you give a plutocrat a bunch of money, that for whatever reason, they're going to, some reason, give it to their employees. Why would they do that? In every other context, you've told them that anything that they earn, they've done it because they're great human beings, and if they've got it, even if it's $100 billion, then somehow they're just that meritorious. But this extra money, for whatever reason, they're going to give that to their employees. Nonsense. And when they pass that tax cut, they know they're not going to give it to their employees. That's the lie that they use in order to go about their affairs. Now, that's theater for the sake of purely just giving money to plutocrats who don't necessarily need it so they can put another comma in their bank account at the expense of public services and at the expense of essentially us. Do you know they put $1 trillion, over $1 trillion on the back of workers in order to pay that tax cut off? And they're raising taxes on his own voters. The people that Donald Trump got to vote for, many of which don't have two nickels to rub together, he ends up putting more on their backs. It's amazing. I'm sure I get what you're saying, but I don't necessarily see how Boris Johnson was elected to represent me either, unless Jeremy Corbyn has awful policies. Come on. Now, to be fair, you're right. They were selected. Cameron fails, and when Cameron fails, he just selects the person that he wants. You would think they would have a snap election on the spot, but no, he selects the person that he wants. And they put in Boris Johnson. They had Brexiteer in those positions. That said, they did have an election. And to some degree, all elections, doesn't matter where you are, is going to have some fudge factor between what the public wants, between what the public gets. Because what the public wants versus what they get is to some degree a compromise. Or, let's be honest, you have politicians who game the system in order to get into power. When you have two really shitty politicians, then ultimately what you're going to get is a shitty person in that government. Unfortunately, that's not just Britain. That's a lot of places. You have Macron in France essentially attacking workers, but he calls himself a socialist. The guy was a fucking banker at one point. You have Donald Trump in the United States. Do you know that only like 9% of the population voted for Donald Trump? That's true. Half of the country, or literally half of the country, doesn't vote. And if you really take into account the number of people that voted in the primaries, you get this really fucked up number where like it was something like 9%. At the very end of the process, you get half of the country to vote to some degree, but even then, he loses on the popular vote. I mean, I feel you. I feel you. That's not just Britain, though. That's not just Britain. People. I live in the EU, and I think the Europe is way more democratic than the USA. Europe is... Yes, but I don't... Yes, kind of, but it depends on what you mean. Like, look, the United States, our system is weird, and it's weird on a few points. We let money creep into our political process, and so for us, money rules the process. Now, think of this. You can't think of a more weird, undemocratic system from the standpoint of oligarchy eating the democratic process. If a politician wants to get elected, you have two parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Both parties takes massive amounts of cash. And both parties taking massive amounts of cash, both parties essentially lean towards the direction of the cash. So if you want to know what a particular party is going to go for, look at who's funding them. Look who's paying them. I mean, ultimately, you can kind of see where the party is going to go. And ultimately, inexorably, it always goes towards cash. Very rarely does policy go towards human beings. And it only goes towards human beings when it coincides with what cash wants. Both parties are co-opted. Both parties are captured. And ultimately, you have a more dwindling demographic of people who vote because most people realize this shit doesn't matter. In my election, I had a spook running against some guy, both of which, for the most part, had fundamentally the same platform. There's no point in me voting in the primaries. It's a waste of a vote. I'm not voting for a Democrat anyway. If you're not supporting healthcare, red line. Not supporting anybody who doesn't represent my interests. I guess I'm making a point to you that I agree with you, but it's not just an absolute. It's not because of the system is bad. And maybe the system is bad. You can make an argument. I mean, we've allowed cash deferred in our system. I would say the system, however, is the capitalistic system. And that if you have a capitalistic system in the way that we have this kind of unfettered capitalism, money is going to creep into the political process and start contorting the process. I mean, at one point, we had a heyday where we did actually have people fighting for those interests. But at the point where the Democratic Party became co-opted, then you had both parties that were captured. In which case, it became somewhat of a pointless process. You had bad and worse, or you could say bad and badder. But the badder becomes less and less and less, meaning it becomes more narrow between the two parties. Hillary Clinton was going to come in and pass a tax cut. Donald Trump came in and passed a tax cut. Hillary Clinton was going to put troops in Syria. And the wild part about it is Donald Trump may be less hawkish than the Democratic candidate. I mean, yes, he's snatching immigrants. That's horrific. But when you look at the policies overall, you had one person who had kids in cages. Obama had kids in cages. That picture that you took was Obama having kids in cages. And for all of the explanations and everything else that the Obama team was trying to put out, they had kids in cages. Now, I'm not saying that he's as bad as Trump on immigration, but you deport 3 million people and nobody says a peep. Donald Trump comes in and all of a sudden everybody screams with their hair on fire. I don't like the immigration policy, and I have a video coming up about the immigration policy today. But if you really want to get something accomplished, the Democratic Party is not it. The Republican Party has just become so batshit crazy that just by proxy or just by standing by, the Democratic Party are like, all right, fine. You don't play with your feces. Fair enough. That's the way our political parties have ended up. The Democrats making this argument to blacks, Hispanics, poor whites. You have nowhere else to go, in which case you're going to vote for us. Now, you can imagine that doesn't necessarily endear people to vote, which is why Democrats lost 1,100 seats all throughout the United States and lost reality shows. I would agree with you that our system has become extremely undemocratic. But that could change. Like, that's not necessarily structural. In our system, you have dollars of pitchforks. You can have pitchforks, and pitchforks can change the political conversation that we have. The catch is, you just don't have those pitchforks. And you think to yourself, at which point do you get the pitchforks? I mean, between working, meaning people are so drowning in debt, they're essentially wage slaves running on a hamster wheel, where they're drowning in debt if they need a car or hospital or education or whatever. They can't afford to strike. They can't afford to think about that stuff. Oftentimes, they don't even think about politics. They don't even look up for politics. They've gerrymandered the districts to the point where you've literally, to some degree, I would make the argument, cheated in order to keep certain politicians in office. Not to mention, plutocrats run the process. When Obama came in, he threw his body to protect the bankers while letting homeowners go bust. He had all of these African Americans with this groundswell report to put the man in the office, and they let African Americans go bust with that homeowners program while, tending to the needs of every banker that he could get his hands on. Even to the point of having bankers choose the people who are going to be in his cabinet. This is after these guys have literally fucked up the economy to the tunes of trillions of dollars. So I agree with you. I don't necessarily know if I'd take the step of saying it's more undemocratic than the EU. But I would agree with you. ACL sued Kobach to try and expose what happened, but Democrats were doing some weird dance about Russians. Greece is the richest country in Europe. Seriously, they have massive resources in natural gas. Burn buckholes. Now that I don't know. You might be right. I don't know. You might be right. Winnie the Shrew, future called small countries like Greece. George Pagog, BS. Greece is no small country. Greece is a small country. Ben Rogue, natural gas is a dozen times worse for the environment than oil. You're making my point for me. That is the same like the US. The UK will not get more left outside of the EU. It would just turn to a tax haven for the Tories. Yeah, and you know what? I gotta be honest. That's the part that concerns me. Honestly, that's the part that concerns me. I'm not fooled by this thing of like Nigel Farage, where Nigel Farage just makes this argument to leave as if he's just some normal bloke, just drinking a beer. If Rees-Mogg is for Brexit, Rees-Mogg is for Brexit because he essentially, like you say, wants to have this bottom basement, tax haven. But that assumes that the Tories retain power. And if the vote was held today, the Tories would lose. If Jeremy Corbyn gets in, would Jeremy Corbyn be able to affect what he wants to affect in Britain under Brussels? And I think that's the question that you need to answer. Now, if your answer is no, do you take the risk? I guess the thing is, do you take the risk? I disagree with the EU on many things like war, but my problem is I don't think the UK outside the EU would be any less of right wing. It depends. Do you believe Corbyn will win? That's what it boils down to. Do you believe Corbyn will win? If your answer is yes, then being in the EU is a problem. If the answer is no, then you're right. It all depends on whether or not you believe the Tories are going to be able to retain power. It looks to me as if Theresa May's government can collapse any day. That's what it looks like to me. For a second campaign, I'm in Mississippi, so I haven't heard it any other way. Oil and gas reserves worth $600 billion in Ionian Sea and South Crete. I wish, but no, the UK deep state would not let them. Oh, Matt. Pessimism is not a survival trait, Matt. I don't think. Yeah, fuck that. Deep state my ass. If that election was held today, I am not accepting that as an answer, mister. That is profound cynicism, and I think Britain has it in it to have a Corbyn as Prime Minister. I don't live there, but I think it has it in it. I wish, but no, the UK would deep state would not let him. I'm skeptical, buddy. I'm skeptical. Corbyn is screwed. Too many Thatcher, Blairite bobbleheads running loose in the UK. I don't know, Bob. You're another cynical SOB, Bob. I don't know. I am of the mind to believe that he has beaten back the Blairites multiple occasions. And he has swelled the numbers of Labour to obscene extents. I don't think you guys are right. I think the signal points more so in the direction of Corbyn being the new Prime Minister. I could be wrong, but I've written it down in my notebook, so I'm going to take that as the word of God. I hope you're right. I'm a bit pessimistic. The right-wingers press will get into overdrive. They're trying already. Have you seen what they've been doing? They've been putting the BBC. So one of the guys, and I know you're going to say you're making my point. One of the guys in the BBC came out. He wasn't a fan of Corbyn's, but made this point that the BBC said they were going to attack Corbyn using media, not necessarily words, but in the way that it looks. So they'll change his hat. They'll put him on a red background. So they're having this talk with Corbyn in the background with all red as if he's in Russia, and he has his red hat on like he's a Ruski. And you're like, wait a minute, they changed that guy's hat. That's fucked up. Yeah, they're going to go into overdrive. But there's a video where Corbyn came out where they were attacking Corbyn about calling him a spy, calling him a communist sympathizer or a communist spy. And Corbyn comes out with a video, and instead of Corbyn shrieking away, instead of him covering his head, he doesn't do that. He pulls a Rorschach. Do you remember when they put Rorschach in prison and the inmates come to try to get him, and Rorschach just flips out, he's just beasting out, and he's like, "You're mistaken. I'm not in here with you. You're in here with me." That's what Jeremy Corbyn pulled. Jeremy Corbyn essentially ripped his shirt off. He says, "You're in here with me." And he goes screaming into the camera, essentially saying he's going to come after the media organizations that were going after him. I was like, holy shit, that's awesome. I love that. I don't like the shrieking backwards in the face of stuff like that. And at this point, he's shown no propensity of backing away from a fight from this stuff. So, I like it. I mean, will Jeremy Corbyn defund the BBC, seeing as somewhat of a right-wing broadcasting thing or a mouthpiece for the Tories? Maybe. Would he be able to pull it off? I don't know. Would the Blairites stop him? Maybe. But is that a fight that you may have in Britain? Maybe. If the same thing had happened to Bernie Sanders, I think Bernie Sanders would have melted in the sun. This is one of the reasons why I like Corbyn. He holds his shape. Do you remember when the thing came up with the spy, the Skirple, spy goes down in Britain, and Corbyn comes out with the government saying Russian did it. We know Russia did it. We know Russia did it because we know Russia did it. God damn it! And don't ask us any questions. And Corbyn says, we need to check what the government is saying because these are very serious charges. And they booed him. They jeered him. They were like, boo! Boo! And then started calling the guy Russian and sympathizer and all this other stuff. He held the shape. What he said in that moment was right. He could have shrieked away and supported the government's position because all of the political pressure was going in the direction of him supporting the government's position. And he didn't do it. He was loyal opposition. I don't think he's going to shrink away into that good night. I could be wrong. I could be utterly wrong. Perhaps I'm being too optimistic. But just to take an inventory, they said Jeremy Corbyn would never become leader of the opposition. He became leader of the opposition. After becoming leader of the opposition, he beat the Blairites when they tried to essentially topple him as leader of the opposition. And he increased his numbers in beating them. In a snap election that the prime minister had, that was supposed to be the war to end labor, literally, she threw that snap election because she was trying to break the back of labor. And instead, her own back was broken. And in her back being broken, she lost the capacity to essentially push Brexit in the way that she wanted to push Brexit, losing the majorities. And the SNP that was running his mouth also lost seats, which was just a nice bonus. I guess I'm making this point that after that, Jeremy Corbyn became a strutting spring chicken in the way that he would hit Theresa May, and he gained a new level of life in those prime minister questions. Look at him immediately, look at him before, and look at him after. And there is a marked difference between Jeremy Corbyn after all of that stuff had taken place. He wasn't supposed to be here now, and he's here now. I wouldn't sell him short. That's all. Yes, I'm being profoundly optimistic, but I don't necessarily think I'm all that wrong. I agree. Jeremy is string, but I also think the polls are the way they are because May is so bad. Yes, she is. If the Tories get somebody like Cameron again, I think many will be fooled again. Let's hope they don't. Let's hope they don't. I think it takes a while to get your stride. If you remember when Tony Blair was prime minister and David Cameron had become leader of the opposition for the Tories, Tony Blair was beating the stuffing out of Cameron over and over and over again. I used to watch those things and Tony Blair just eviscerating Cameron. He was so good at PMQs. He was amazing at PMQs. I've never seen anything like it. And what I realized was that it takes a while for somebody to get familiar with that process of being leader of the opposition. Cameron, at a certain point, becomes pretty damn good at PMQs. Lies flagrantly, but he becomes pretty good. Theresa May, not so much. Theresa May is not good at the dispatch box. It has nothing to do with her being a woman, before anybody says that. It's more so, it's a few things. She's defending Brexit, which she doesn't have an answer for. And she has to deal with these competing elements in her party that are somewhat diametrically opposed. How do you deal with that? And how do you deal with that with all of the public watching you and with a government that's somewhat fractured because your government is purely dependent upon the DUP? How do you deal with that stuff? She has all of these competing things that she has to deal with. But I got to be honest, even before that point, she wasn't great at PMQs. Just wasn't good at it. Jamal, what do you think of John McDonnell, Corbyn's shadow secretary? I don't know enough about him, to be honest. Data de la Terra. Yeah, I don't know enough about him. I don't know all of the personalities in British politics. Like, I don't have the same knowledge of British politics as I do of American politics. But I know the themes that are taking place. And I drill down into people involved when a particular issue comes up, if that makes sense. Especially when it's something I don't fully understand. But I can't answer that question. I don't know enough about it. Maybe she should stop defending Brexit and start thinking about Brexit. What? She should stop defending Brexit and start thinking about Brexit. Look, man, the Irish border issue is by itself damning. And I gotta be honest, I still think Jeremy Corbyn's position on this makes no sense, but I think he's only able to have that position because Theresa May's position is terrifying. I've said it before, I'm not for or against Brexit. I'm, in an odd way, I'm agnostic towards Brexit. I do have concerns. I absolutely have concerns. So, Parliament is a toothless tiger. The EU Commission has power and they are not elected by the population. That's my point. They're not elected by the population. It's an unelected body. Get rid of NATO. I think you mean NATO. You know, it's funny. It's like the Soviet Union fell apart and yet NATO still persists. Like a zombie. Not having a purpose, but always looking for something to do. So yeah. A total of 751 MEPs currently represent some 500 million. Wow. 500 million people. 500 million people. Jesus Christ. From 28 member states. Well, to be fair, let's see. We have, 400 and something in Congress. I forget the exact number. It's like 420 or something like that. My lens is post-communist log rolling. I don't know if the EU has a whiplash between the two parties we have in the United States, but Eastern Europe has trouble with a lot of national direction turning 180 every term. Oh, I see what you mean. Essentially, you have an election and then somebody else wins, in which case they take the government in a completely different direction. Yeah, but those countries haven't been trying to leave the EU. I mean, those aren't really a problem from the standpoint of the EU. I know there's apparently one of the nations has like a authoritarian dictator or something to the effect, like some like, you know, the first dictator in the EU. But yeah, the EU Parliament is elected by the people of the EU. The Parliament is, but not the main body. Like nobody elected Juncker. Nobody elected, like, you know, you can make an argument that says the people who were elected then elected those the main leaders. But come on, I mean, is that fulfilling? I mean, imagine for the moment if the United States didn't elect the president of the United States, but instead the House of Representatives end up electing the president of the United States. Do you know who is in the House of Representatives? Those people are fucking maniacs. So, as opposed to when you look across the wide distribution of the country itself, well, those people are, you know, as a point where you get to the overall part of the country, well, the overall part of the country is not right-wingers. Like, just from California alone had 3 million more votes for Hillary Clinton. One state. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote purely because of California. She lost it based on everybody else. Meaning, if you take California out, she loses the election. But you add California in. California is such a massive state. It's 3 million more votes. But imagine for the moment that instead of the people themselves electing the president, imagine for the moment the House of Representatives or the Senate. Like, that's an unsatisfying thing, if that makes sense. We used to have that. Like, we changed that. Like, we used to, not the president, but we used to have it where, like, our representatives were chosen by other representatives as opposed to having those people have those direct elections. That was eventually changed because that was seen as being undemocratic. So, Jamal, that's the same as Obama picking Perez for labor secretary. You didn't vote for him. You voted for Obama to make the pick. It's the same with the EU. No, that's not the same. I mean, is it the same? Is it the same? I don't know if that's the same. Something is telling me it's not. Something deep down is telling me it's not, but I need to think about that one. I gotta think about it. I don't want to reflexively say it's not. I want to say it's not. The powers of the labor secretary are still... See, here's the thing. I know what it is. I don't know the distribution of power. Like, I don't know the powers that the members of the EU have from that standpoint. Also, there's a difference in... That's one country. You're representing... How many? Like 50 member states? Yeah, dude. No, man. No. Like the labor secretary of the United States, one singular country with a relatively similar culture, is one thing. You're not representing one country. You're literally representing like 50 member states, and those people aren't necessarily being chosen. They're being appointed. I guess what I'm saying is, at one point, we used to have our representative chosen in a similar fashion. That was changed because it was seen as undemocratic. I don't think it's the same thing as the president choosing Tom Perez as the labor secretary. I mean, it would be like there being elections all throughout the EU, those people choosing the people who are to head the main bodies of the EU, not the parliament, but the people who are in charge. And then the people who are in charge appointing certain ministers to head those agencies to some degree. This is a little different. You're talking about choosing upward, if that makes sense. the president of the United States choosing a labor secretary is appointing somebody below him. The people in the parliament at this point, those people who have been chosen are choosing a superior. That's a little different. That's not the people themselves of those different countries choosing a superior, in which case the superior then appoints people who are below him, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. There's a difference in those things. At least I think there's a difference in those things. Jamal, I believe governors used to pick the senators. That's it. Governors used to pick the senators. Thank you, Troy. I couldn't remember exactly which one it was. There's a channel that has it does, I think I've said it before, it's called The Great War. It does the World War I, going from the beginning of the war all the way to the end of the war for 4 years, dealing with 1 week at a time. It is an amazing show. My head is jumbled with that stuff because I've been binge watching that show. And so some of the stuff I think is being cluttered out. But nevertheless, I remember some of the stuff. I remember, we used to choose our senators. Those gotten rid of. But the EU doesn't have the same level of power over the member states as the U.S. federal government. That's true. No, that's true. You're ascribing the same level of power to the EU as the U.S. federal government. That's true, but if that's true, you can't necessarily make the comparison of the United States government from the standpoint of the president appointing a representative. If you're right about it not being the same, then you can't compare it as being apples to apples. Senators used to represent state governments in D.C. Now they represent themselves and are up for the highest bidder. That's a goddamn shame, Bob, and you're right. That's a goddamn shame. You're absolutely right. World War I lasted until 1923. Yeah, The Great War is awesome. George Pagog. Yes, it is. That show is amazing. George, there's another version of that, by the way. He does another show that I stumbled onto where he's talking about between the war years. Now, that's on a different channel, but he's talking about immediately after the World War I going up until World War II. Oh, it's awesome. You get to see where Hitler was during that time. You get to see where Stalin was during that time. Oh, it's awesome. It's so awesome. So awesome. World War II began in 1922. World War II did not begin in 1922. World War II began in 1941 or something to that effect, or 1939 or 38. I think it ended in 42. World War I was in 1914 or something to that effect. Yeah, 1914, 1918. But yeah, Blogo Plogo, World War II didn't start in 1922. 1939, thank you. But it went to 1941 or 1942. 1942. There's a video game called 1942 that always helps you remember the end date of the war. I know this sounds weird. Sweet, I have to find it. Is it called In the Trenches? They do have one, In the Trenches. So that's another thing. You get to see when trench warfare started. You get to see all the machinations of the government, of all of the governments. You can see the number of lives they used to throw into the meat grinder. Like, their view of life was horrific. I mean, you had a czar in Russia who was essentially a monarch. You had Britain, France, Italy. You had all of these countries, some of which just being dragged into the war, kicking and screaming. You had Greece being occupied by multiple military powers, even though Greece was supposed to be independent at that point. It was fucking awesome. It gets into the point, though, where it starts the trench warfare and how the gassing starts, the trench warfare tactics. Oh, man, it's awesome. It's awesome. The amount of life that they wasted is mind-blowing. Like, you had some of these engagements where they would have 4 million men fighting at once. Cases where hundreds of thousands of men would lose their lives. They would French military tactics where they would have people going over the top, running into machine gun fire, and they would just continuously do it over and over and over again. And it's like, wait a minute, there's a machine gun there, and they're just mowing down your guys. Why are you using your guys up this way? It shows this attachment between how they would view their men and how they would not be able to change their military tactics despite their men being eaten away. It's fascinating, man. It's completely fascinating. John B., pretty much Americans are taught World War I was started by some lone gunman shooting Franz Ferdinand. Yes, that's how we learned World War I. The shooting of Franz Ferdinand leading to a bunch of kind of. Let me say it this way. That was a spark. Let's say it that way. I'll say it that way. Because it's not... You had Britain... All of these countries had this weird military doctrine of sorts. And in this military doctrine, they kind of believed in these alliances, with these alliances making them more safe in the world. While at the same token, Serbia and Hungary had figured, I'm not going into details. I guess all I'm saying is the countries had their own machinations. So you had somewhere like Germany or Britain wanted to retain a certain amount of military dominance. Germany had started to get more military dominance from the standpoint of the naval bases. Each country started to jockey for position in colonies. And then in a wild way, you had the propagation of the war. Like, even though Franz Ferdinand was shot, a war didn't have to take place at that point. I mean, ultimately, you had Austria-Hungary pushing that war because it believed that now is as good a time as any, and we need to put a hedge on Serbian power, and pushing for the war. They blamed Germany for the war, but it wasn't necessarily Germany's fault. It's fucking fascinating. It's like 23 hours long. It's a curse and a blessing. Yeah, it's funny. My wife is like, fuck. She was like, God damn it, not again. She was like, not again. The Napoleonic Wars was a world war. Yeah. That was another one. The Napoleonic Wars was another fascinating one, where liberty, fraternity, and they get to the point of saying we are free. As a French nation, we've overturned our rulers, and we believe that all of these other countries need to have their rulers overturned. Do you know that many of the other rulers looked at France as like this weird anomaly, and this kind of like a disease that needed to be quarantined because they didn't necessarily want their populations to hear this shit about not having a king and a queen? It's fucking fascinating. This was amazing. Jesus Christ, you're telling us elementary school level stuff. Well, it wasn't. I mean, how detailed you want me to go into it? It's fucking fascinating. They pushed Austria to demand ridiculous. Yeah. From Serbia. Yeah. I mean, I've gone over this on the show, so I kind of don't necessarily want to go over it again. But they gave them demands. I did that in one of my other videos where I kind of went through this thing of making comparisons between the way World War I has been structured versus the way Trump is interacting with Iran. This thing of kind of a demand that there's no way to fulfill. Most of the demands, if you remember, were met. The only demand that wasn't met was this idea of being able to have prosecutions in the country itself. Meaning they themselves, Austria, wanted to have essentially have their judicial system inside the other country. No country in their right mind could fulfill that obligation. But even then, they didn't turn it down. They said, we're going to refer this to like the International Court or something to that effect. And that wasn't enough for Austria-Hungary. Beyond it not being enough for Austria-Hungary, Germany didn't necessarily want to fight that war. And not just Germany didn't necessarily want to fight that war. Austria-Hungary pushed that war against what was essentially an officer telling them not to push that war. One of the other people were responsible. I can't think of the guy's name. But they blamed Germany for it. The wild part about it is, at the end of that war, somebody said this was going to be a 20-year armistice. And that's exactly what it ended up being. It's fucking amazing. The good guys were the people who got slaughtered. The whole concept of good guys. That war ended up with a lot of atrocities taking place. I've made the argument that war has been the foundation of our current society. Because I think that's true. You can make an argument that the First World War was a French and Indian War because it was fought on multiple continents. But whatever, we consider the First World War to be the First World War. Lawrence of Arabia, all of these dashing military campaigns and everything. But ultimately, Austria-Hungary wanted to cut down on the power of Serbia. And they looked at this as a way of doing it. So at the point where Franz Ferdinand was shot, they said, this is our pretext. It's no different than the Republican Party essentially using 9/11 as a pretext for this kind of militaristic expansion into the Middle East. What is it? The camp. What is it called? The document. It's Rejuvenation of America. I'm sorry, I've been up all night, so my brain's a little scattered. But Rejuvenation of America, something to that effect, where the Republican Party had created, or these neocons had created this plan of essentially reshaping the Middle East in their own image. It's no different. Countries use certain things for pretext. The Gulf of Tonkin being the pretext for the First World War. The Iranian thing, creating this quote-unquote revolution, creating this uproar in the country itself, and then pretending as if this uproar was a natural thing in Iran because they didn't necessarily want BP to, because Iran wanted to start using the oil revenue for the country itself. Pretext is one of those things that's often used. One of the things that I didn't fully know, however, up to this point, was that the Austria-Hungary essentially pushed the war. They wanted to cut down on Serbian influence. All of those people lost their lives. And what's wild about it, even though Austria-Hungary pushed for that war, they were one of the most inept militaries in that campaign. It was fucking amazing. They became ultimately a client state of the German army, in which case at the end of the war they became just disbanded. It was amazing. Austria was a fist puppet for Germany. It didn't start that way, Blogo. It became that way because they were getting their ass handed to them. They even got beat by Serbia. There's a part in the war where Austria-Hungary was the only country, believe it or not, to accomplish their objectives in the war. The only country, the most inept, started the war, literally started that war because they thought they had German backing, and so they thought, hey, we got a big brother here. Fuck it, let's do it. We're just going to cut down on their influence. And they made the assumption that no other nation would get involved in the conflict. They were wrong. They were magnificently wrong. And not just magnificently wrong, they did accomplish their objectives, which was to essentially put the screws to Serbia. They accomplished their objectives for all of like a few days, because after the counterattack, Serbia essentially took their land back. Mind you, they did this at a major expense. Serbia was a small country. They were able to put that major effort, but that major effort cost them dearly. But nevertheless, Austria-Hungary, the most inept of all the militaries, they did accomplish their objective for all of like 2 days. It's fucking amazing. My angst in this, when I'm talking about the stuff that's taking place right now in Syria, you have Qatar, Turkey, the United States, the UK, France, Israel, ISIS, or you can say the terrorists, Russia, Iran, all in the same country. Think about that shit. All of them fucking around in the one country. If Russia accidentally kills, let's say, 100 Americans in an attack. Let's say Russia shoots down an American plane. Let's say it's the other way around. Let's say the United States shoots down a Russian plane. What takes place? What takes place? Does NATO immediately get activated if America is under attack? And if America says, oh my God, Russia shot down our plane, what would the Democrats say? This is profoundly dangerous. You have NATO nations that are in close conflict with Russia. Russia has been in jamming communications with the United States because, let's be honest, the United States is illegally in a country that it has no business being in. If Russia shoots down one of their planes, it will be the United States' fault for being in that country illegally. Of all the people that are in that country, Iran and Russia have been invited by the actual government of that country, we have no business being there. I find this to be as profoundly dangerous as the First World War and the situations that led to it. Right now, the United States gave Iran a similar document as Germany gave Serbia. And in giving them that similar document, they gave them this kind of poison document that they know was going to be ignored out of hand. Part of the document is trying to tell Syria that they should get rid of Iran, or that Iran should leave Syria. This is nonsense. How are you going to tell them to leave a country that invited them there? This stuff is utterly stupid. And yet, this is the document that they gave. This is one of those documents, just like the document that was given to Serbia. Here's the document, or an ultimatum that you can never, ever accept. You can never, ever accept it. JT is early birding. Jim Garrison. Yeah, I'm early birding. My wife is up. I haven't been to bed yet. First name, last name. Austro-Hungary did not know the extent of the web secret treaties and the pacts of the mutual defense and the French had erected. It doesn't matter. They were wrong. They assumed that no other country would. Fuck, man, we've gotten wonkish. Austria-Hungary made the assumption that no other country was going to get involved in that conflict. They were magnificently wrong. Fact is, part of the reason why I'm anti-war, non-interventionist is because you have no idea how that stuff is going to turn out. Do you remember when MacArthur tells, I think it was Eisenhower, that the Chinese was not going to get involved in the Korean War? He was wrong. He was wrong. He was completely wrong. It wasn't. Oh, who was it? My brain is foggy. But he essentially tells Eisenhower the Chinese are not going to get involved. I can see his face. I can see him. He has the fucking Damn it! I can see the thing. He has his face. He has the thing. I can't think of his name. He was a general. He was a famous general. He was in World War II. He ends up being in the Korean War. He has the pipe and the hat. He's famous for the pipe and the hat. I cannot think of his name to save my life, and I know the moment that I look him up, I'm going to know exactly who he is. Damn it, no, not General Pipe. Yes, I'm looking it up. It's bugging the shit out of me. MacArthur! That's who it is. MacArthur. Yeah, MacArthur tells Eisenhower that the Chinese would not enter the Korean War and they could push further into the territory. He was magnificently wrong. And you had like 1 million Chinese come running over the hill and pushing back the Americans to the demilitarized zone. It's hard to know what you're going to get in a wartime situation. And generals often overpromise and say shit that's ridiculous. But they give their assessments. Think of John Bolton whispering in the ear of the President of the United States, telling him that there's a nuclear triad again, just like there was a nuclear triad in the Bush administration, this time between North Korea, Iran, and some other nation that he wants to attack. I mean, come on. This stuff is fucking ridiculous. Their country was destroyed. There is no Austria-Hungary Empire anymore. Yeah. Of course it matters. If these treaties had been public, then World War I would not have happened. Or if he wasn't pushing for a war, then World War One wouldn't have happened. Also, if they wouldn't have pushed for a treaty or pushed for an ultimatum that they knew was not going to be accepted, I mean, come on. The fault here lies with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, not the people who were part of a treaty. They pushed for a war, and they just so happened was massively unprepared for the repercussions of that war. Yeah, the founders, I don't know how to think about their excluding women and slaves, but I can hope they tried to make room for the inevitable, but they didn't want corporations. Chris Foster, Andorra and Germany didn't officially sign a treaty with Germany ending World War I until September 25, 1939, because they were missed off the original Treaty of Versailles. Andorra's army consisted of 10 soldiers. Well, they didn't originally sign it because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. Like, Germany didn't believe they lost that First World War. If you remember, when Germany went back, they assumed that it was going to be under Woodrow Wilson's 14-point plan. This idea of peace and, justice and everybody has a beer and it's a kumbaya and there are no winners and losers. Well, France and Britain wanted winners and losers. And at that point, Germany has disbanded their army, so they didn't have any, it's like, if you don't sign this, we will put our armies on your soil. Well, you can imagine that the people of Germany were somewhat pissed off. They didn't see that they lost the war, and yet they were being told that they lost the war and was being told that it was their fault to boot. Well, this wasn't going to sit well at all. Imagine how Bernie Sanders supporters felt. Yes, I'm taking it to Bernie Sanders supporters. The DNC cheats Sanders. Imagine how they felt. Look at HA. Look at his show. How do you think HA started? He was pissed off. To some degree of the show, I was pissed off. I still am. I despise the Democratic Party for what it is now. Same thing, Republican Party. I despise both. I don't like both. I think both are problematic. But the thing that brings you to those awarenesses or the awareness is a permutation that wasn't there before that gets created, where the repercussions of that permutation are not necessarily seen in the people who are pushing those agendas. Meaning, France looking to punish Germany creates this deep-seated hatred from the standpoint of the Germans to the other countries. And yeah, that deep-seated hatred ended up with the avatar of Adolf Hitler. Now, you put that country in massive turmoil. What did they think was going to happen? The guy who said we have a 20-year armistice, that guy ended up being right. Because ultimately, that peace treaty wasn't a peace treaty. It was just there to essentially punish Germany. Treaty of Versailles. Scandalous. Thanks y'all poking me back and redo my self-taught history. I try to find 3 or more sides to the story, but I need to redo World War One. World War One is fucking phenomenal. I knew World War Two was my introductory into this stuff, and I knew nothing much about World War One. In fact, I wasn't even all that interested in it. There's a show called Secrets of War. Yeah, there's a show called Secrets. For as anti-war as I am, I'm fascinated by the whole fucking thing. I played chess my entire life. And because I think I've played chess my entire life, it's put me into this attitude of tactics and a certain rousing military speeches. Even though I'm not all that fascinated with the whole thing of war. It's so weird. Like, I can hear somebody give a speech, and then I'm like, yes, let's kick some ass. And people are looking at me in the movie theater. My bad. I was just hyped up. You got me hyped up. Yeah, man. That shit is awesome. Guided by profit motive aimed at causing maximum instability to justify the production of weapons. You talking about World War One? Kasparov, just kidding. He used to be my favorite chess player. But it's one of those things where they say you don't want to meet your heroes. He's never been a hero, so he's never been that strong. But clearly chess doesn't translate into real life. Unless he's playing a different game. So. Knight became 4, mate. That's funny. Blackstone Intelligence notches a little into a zone that creeps me out. It makes me want to push back on the rest of the stuff. He plays chess. Blackstone. Who's Blackstone? I don't know Blackstone Intelligence. Notice that McAltal is my avatar. Oh, Misha! Yes, he is. Favorite player. Hands down, favorite player. His books. He has a book called McAltal Life and Games of Chess. And it is one of the best chess books. Two favorite books. The King Hunt. And that is just candy for chess players. Like, it's kings being treated brutally and chased around the board. And you're seeing it from the standpoint of grandmasters even getting, having the indignity of having their king chased around the board. And these guys are supposed to be like 2,600. And the Life and Games of McAltal. Hands down. There's another book that I ended up loving when I got older. It was... I can't think of the name of it. It's like Strategic Chess. But it's all of these guys that are amazing at, like, Petrosian, Kasparov. Petrosian, Karpov, Nimzovich. It's all of these guys who are amazing at strategic chess. They even break it up into the categories and all this other stuff. That was one of my favorite books. But The Life and Games of McAltal is just a damn good book. There's one scene in the book where he's talking about how do you get a hippopotamus out of the marsh. And I fell in love with that book reading that scene. He's in the middle of a game and he's having trouble with the position. And he's like, I can't figure out how to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish in this position. And he's sitting there, and with chess you have a clock, so you have X amount of time. And he starts thinking like, he's like, this is kind of like trying to get a hippopotamus out of the marsh. And he's like, how do you get a hippopotamus out of the marsh? And in the game notes, he's recounting the story about how do you get a hippopotamus out of the marsh. And it's like goes all the way around Robin Hood's barn, chopping all this wood. And Sir Boy's like, fuck it, just let him drown. And then when he says let him drown, he goes into this kind of speculative, dubious, sacrificial attack that eventually wins the game. The book is awesome. The book is absolutely awesome. You let him drown, right? Matthew B. Squat, you let him drown. That's all, you let him drown. Bobby Fischer Blues. Bobby Fischer was good. He was just nuts. Bobby Fischer was just nuts. He fucking lost it at the end. I was talking about a current foreign policy situation rather than World War I. I see. Some of the architects of the Iraq War, like Stephen Hadley, worked for companies like Raytheon, which is weapons contractors. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that at all. Because, right now the companies have been bragging about how much oil they've been able to take from Iraq. Essentially, a bunch of oil companies being able to get their hands on the oil in Iraq. So, it's like they spend $7 trillion of our money, public money, in order to put oil in the hands of a bunch of companies. Fucking amazing. Absolutely amazing. Bobby Fischer sucks at chess was only right about Jews. Oh, God. That's brutal. Oh, that's brutal. Yeah, Bobby Fischer was fucking nuts. Anti-Semitic to the hilt. He was... I don't think he was rap tight, though. Like, I don't know if our anti-Semitism was an artifact of him just not being all that there. He wasn't rap tight. He wasn't rap tight at all. He was fucking nuts. But can play chess. Like not, as he got older, he became more unhinged. His chess game somewhat suffered. He still could beat the shit out of Spassky. So there's that. I mean, when they came out of retirement in order to play, he beat the hell out of Spassky. But not the same Fischer. Definitely not the same Fischer. Fischer had this uncomplicated way of playing chess. Like it's hard to explain. It's like, what's his name? Alkaline, and oh God, man, I need to get some rest. I've been up too late. I can't believe I don't remember his name. Capablanca. Capablanca was kind of like that. really uncomplicated, you can almost even call it to some degree boring way of chess. Simplistic, straightforward, a pawn is a pawn is a pawn. I'm going to move this here because I need to take this particular positional game. I don't need to be flashy. I don't need to be sexy. I just need to win. That's essentially that style. Fischer added a certain amount of flair to it, but it was still this kind of simplistic, uncomplicated way of playing. People like Alkaline used to have these complicated, awesome games. And when you read his notes were awesome because Alkaline used to talk about his powers. He's like, my powers on this day was fading. When he was playing Yui, he used to act like Yui was a pushover. He just beat the shit out of him. And not so much. Not so much. Oh, Wesley Walker, Jamal, send me a request on Steam. I'll play you in chess. Actually, I want somebody to play me in either Civilization or Galactic Civilization, or I've been playing those two games. I've been playing XCOM, Beyond Earth, or Beyond Civilization. No, Beyond Earth. XCOM 2, Beyond Earth, Galactic Civilization, and Civilization for Xbox One. Those have been the games I've been binging on. XCOM is one of my favorites, but from the standpoint of playing somebody, I've been actually thinking about playing. I've been curious to see if anybody would be interested in playing something like Civ. I don't think that anyone would be interested in videotaping it, but I think the game itself may be fun. Data Tour Latera, I love strategy games. We may have a winner. Long War is the only way I can play XCOM 2 now. Ducky Head. XCOM 2 is pretty badass, ain't it? Fucking love that game. I'll play you in Chinese checkers. Jim Garrison. Okay, I could have sworn he went full tilt Rothschilds in one of his episodes. Chris Foster. I have a book in 1934 warning about the rise of Hitler and outlining his plans. It's called Hitler Over Europe by Ernest Henry. It's a fascinating read. You know, the wild part about it is Hitler had written Mein Kampf. If anybody was curious about what he was going to do, it was in the fucking book. It was in the book. They just didn't think he was that crazy. Well, they were wrong. And here's another tidbit. Germany at the time. Oh man, there's two tidbits. That's fucking awesome, just from a historical context, and we've gone like almost 2 hours. But Germany was hit by all sorts of political uprisings in the war. World War I, all sorts of political uprisings. There were mutinies. There were people who were pushing back. This was on all fronts, meaning in Russia, Germany. I think even in France at one point. But let's stick with Germany for the moment. In order to deal with this, one of the things that the German government did in order to put down these rebellions was to essentially pass a law. And in that law, they said that the chancellor could suspend rule of law in cases of emergencies when he needed to do it. Fast forward to 1939. Adolf Hitler. The rule of the law that Adolf Hitler uses to essentially rescind laws was that particular law. Meaning that law was essentially forged in the heat of World War I in order to quell rebellions that was taking place all throughout Germany. It's fucking fascinating. That's utterly fascinating. One of the other ones had to do with what was that? What was the other one? Oh, Lenin. So Lenin, there were two rebellions in Russia, actually three, but let's talk about the first one, the one that failed. The Bolsheviks had taken over Petrograd, and in taking over Petrograd, the Bolsheviks had essentially, they were driving by and they were being brutes. They were killing people and injuring people. Now, in doing so, the military essentially was dispatched from the front lines in order to quell the rebellion. And in quelling the rebellion, the military eventually, Trotsky is captured. Lenin flees. And when they finally take over the main place that was the outpost, they find out that Germany had been paying Lenin. So Germany wanted to create destabilization in Russia because it realized that it couldn't beat Russia in an outright war. Russia was losing men left and right, but Russia is a massive fucking country, and Russia could essentially have like an endless supply of men to continuously send on the front lines. There were like 9 million men on front lines from Russia. I think Germany had about 4 million. So you can imagine that they needed to make sure that Russia didn't pose the level of a threat that it could have posed if it just had an unhinged, all-out war against their country. So they were funding Lenin. Now, Lenin wasn't necessarily pro-German. It just so happens that he just was against that particular government, and being against that government, he was willing to accept funding from the German government. When the German government, when this was revealed, meaning in the newspaper that day, they published that shit in the newspaper that day, the Bolsheviks lost all sorts of support. And you can imagine that at that point, it looked treasonous what the Bolshevik Party and what Lenin was doing. But to get across how horrible the conditions were, Bolsheviks were able to have another revolution. And in that revolution, Lenin was able to come back and they were able to consolidate power. But this is after the realization that Germany was paid. And Germany tried the same thing for Mexico, trying to get Mexico to declare war on the United States and to take back the territory of Texas. Fucking amazing, man. Fucking amazing. Let's see. Did you hear that Hannah and Nomiki were laid off from TYT? It's a weird thing since they were fired so many people and have no real journalists. Scam. So Matthew B Squad, that's another video I have for today. Someone told me that there were several layoffs, not just those two. And yeah, there were several layoffs. And the question was asked, as they told me that, what happened to the money for the journalists? What happened to... Hey, Jake, where's the cash? Where's the cash? Yeah, that's a little weird. Now, my question was, it seemed like Nomiki was doing great work. Why did they let her go? And are they having money difficulties and money trouble? What's going on? What's going on? I want to know. I asked this after your main point not to distract. No, I didn't take it as distract. Yeah, the question is... Yeah, I read it. I didn't think it was a question. Yes, you asking scam? No, they were fired. They were let go. They were laid off. I mean, Miki's page has that they were laid off. And apparently it wasn't just them. There were just the front people that you saw where you just know of. There were multiple people laid off. The question is... There are two questions. People gave money for journalists because Cenk Uygur said he wanted to expand into having journalists on his team. Great. Nomiki was one of the journalists that he hired. Great. She seemed to be loving her job, and I may have a difference of opinion on her. My heart goes out to her that she lost her job because it seems like she loved it. I mean, it literally seems like she was enjoying her job. There didn't seem to be a distinction between ideology, meaning her ideology was in line with their ideology. And unless there was something that took place that we don't know of, and from what I've heard, it wasn't just them two, it was a lot of people that were fired. So the question becomes, A, was there a time limit on the money that the people gave? Meaning, when the people gave the money, was it like, this is enough money for a year? But would Nomiki take a job if it was purely just enough money for a year? That's a little weird. Hey, we have enough money just to keep it for a year. Yes, I'm going to leave where I am in order to come on to this. I don't think that's the case. Was there a time limit on the money that they received for the journalists? Meaning this amount lasts for a particular time. If not, are they experiencing financial difficulties? Is that a fair question? That's not a hit on TYT. That's just asking a question. TYT danced in the blood of Glenn Beck's channel, whatever that channel was called. I don't even remember the name of it. I do remember them dancing a jig when it started having financial trouble. And I do remember Cenk Uygur making predictions that the thing was going to go belly up, and laughed heartily when it went belly up. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to see anybody lose their jobs per se. And if I'm being honest, I think there's a difference between Glenn Beck's shitty channel, and while I don't like the tenor that TYT has taken, it's not the same. I don't think it's the same. That being said, would they let her go if they had their ducks in a row? Meaning, would they let her go under the best of conditions? I don't think so. But I don't know. And I don't have anybody on the inside that will give me the heads up. I don't know. Aliens rock, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't mention them. Who are you talking about, George Bagad? I talk about aliens all the time. Who got let go? Nomiki Kantz for one. And apparently somebody said Hannah Arendt. But apparently there may be more. And I've heard there were more. I heard it wasn't just her. I heard it was several people. And this person is a pretty good authority on it. So, Nomiki and Hannah. I'm curious if I heard there were more. And I heard that there were financial troubles associated with the company. But again, I don't know this as a flat fact. And I haven't spoken to Nomiki, so I don't know. But yeah, I'll leave it at that one. You said 5, I think. See, I was looking it up and I couldn't find anything about it. I was trying to validate what I was being told. Cenk and Anna have their heads clean up their DNC's ass, so that isn't the reason. Hannah is off think tank. Yeah, I say MSNBC light, and tell me I'm wrong. It gets more and more that way. Play Star Wars over Public Jamal. You'll love the operative storyline. I'll try it, George. I'll try it. Something hideous is happening in the DNC. Pogo. I have like 2 stories on the DNC. Do you know that the DNC is trying to stop Trump from potentially bringing troops back home? Think about that. Instead of trying to pull troops out of these countries that are there illegally, they are literally trying to stop him from doing so. When he tried to pull troops out of Syria, it was the DNC that was like, no, we don't like him doing this. What do you mean you don't like him pulling troops out of a country that is there illegally? Are you shitting me? And now they're in this weird, odd, ignoble situation of trying to stop him from pulling troops out of North Korea. Now, I don't think he's going to pull them out of North Korea if North Korea doesn't abide by the terms to which they're trying, meaning this kind of the idea of a peace process. But the very point that the Democratic Party is trying to intrude upon the president's power to literally pull back is embarrassing. I mean, that's fucking amazing. If this was Obama, I mean, think about that. Think about if when the Republican Party tried to block Obama from doing the treaty with Iran. That's what this puts me in the mind of. Wesley Walk, I will message you with my gamer tag and Steam name. I'm game for Civ. Never played it though. So I don't have Civ. I have Beyond Earth. Beyond Earth is similar to Civ. Beyond Earth is not as good as Civ, but Beyond Earth is a decent, game for I think it's decent, especially if you're to play multiplayer. And look, I am open to purchasing like a strategy game if people are up for it. I'm been looking for a game similar to XCOM. So just let me know, guys. And the reason why I think this way, one of the guys, Star Trek Lore Reloaded, plays Star Trek online with his audience. The game is shitty. It's not a good game. Don't play it. And I'm saying this as somebody who loves Star Trek. So if I'm saying the game is horrible, but it's free, so feel free to try. But it's repetitive and it can be somewhat clunky. I didn't necessarily think it was all that good. But you can imagine that if you have a Star Trek channel or just a sci-fi channel and you have a bunch of people who are into it, it's just an excuse for him to dick around with his audience. I thought it was so cool. I thought it was an awesome idea. Awesome idea. So I am open to playing some game with my audience. I just think it's a great idea. I love the idea. It's me again. I do gotta say, not knowing the difference between Gnostic and agnostic atheist is a bit confusing. I respect you a lot, though. What said? It's funny. I got a long email from Luca reading me the Riot Act. First saying, look, the common definition that people use for atheists. I understand that people can come up with the specific definitions and everything else. Fair enough. But the common run-of-the-mill definition that people tend to use is this non-belief in God. So I use that so everybody knows what the fuck I'm talking about. Yeah, that's a religious belief. Halo. I just bought Halo Wars. I hate that fucking game. I hate that game. I would play you in Civ or Galactic Civ. You're welcome to message me at the same Steam tag as this. Have 350 hours on Civ. Oh, Jesus Christ. And 100 on Galactic Civ. You're interested. Oh, God. Jeremy Chase, don't go there again, Jamal. No, I'm not Jeremy. That's going to a rabbit hole. But Civ, you just want to kick my ass in Civ. Fair enough. I have Galactic Civ. I don't have anywhere near. I think I might have like 3 hours on Galactic Civ. But I'll throw down the gauntlet, buddy. B Squad, I'm just saying no one has an agnostic belief about insert fate things. No, that's fair enough. Like, no, I understand what you mean. It's not like look, I'll say this. Between there's God and there's Jesus, and Jesus has secretaries, and those secretaries, his angels, go out and do things, and there's a hierarchy, and it's like you get into these. So for that part, I agree with you. It's not making shit up in a grand scale. That I agree with you. Kathy Lloyd, God never did anything for me. I love that. God never did anything for me. Co-op is fine. Yeah, I gotta be honest. I've only played, I've just gotten Galactic Civ. So you will kick my ass, Galactic Civ. You will kick my ass royally. Gnostic means you know God doesn't exist, whereas agnostic means you aren't sure. Oh, I see. David Kirby, thank you. Kathy Lloyd, I agree. Look, for political discourse, my conversations for political discourse assumes God is not in the mix. It takes it off the table. I don't think you can have a political argument and include God. I think you lose the moment that you include God. Because, hey, maybe my God supports my policies completely. I mean, fuck. If we're going to add shit that God does or God believes in, my God is going to believe in everything that I believe in. So take them apples. So, yeah, there's that. Since you can't prove a negative, Gnosticism, atheism is unfounded, although probably correct in belief. Yeah, I don't know why you think it's probably correct. Like there. That's what I mean. It's probably correct in belief. What does that mean, and how do you know? And that's kind of my point when I say there's a there's not that much of a difference between a belief in one versus belief in nothing. Both of those things are just utterly belief. You have no idea. I mean, for that matter, you don't even know if anybody else exists. Like, as I sit here right now, I can't prove that anybody else exists outside of me. Think about that shit. And how can you prove otherwise? I mean, ultimately, I know my thoughts. Everybody else can be a figment of my imagination. I could be sitting in a machine right now that's procedurally generating all of this with just magnificent technology that we haven't necessarily caught up with. I have no idea. I have no idea. So this idea of that's probably correct. Yeah, not so much. We're a brain in a vat. Right there. I think we're a brain in a vat. Right. Because there's zero actual evidence. But there's zero actual evidence for the other stuff too. And that's not really true, by the way. That's not zero actual evidence. People who say that always makes me skeptical of their argument, because that means they didn't look. When you look at past life research, like the guy in Virginia, the head of the UVA, published peer-reviewed literature about kids who remember past lives. Tom Campbell is about to do a physics experiment. He got a bunch of money to do, going further than the double slit experiment, making this argument that this is a virtual simulation. If Tom Campbell is right, then the projection of the virtual would have to be other. You have multiple physicists. I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but books by Rupert Sheldrake and other guys, Stanford Research Institute, some of the noetic studies. There is ample evidence for it. What you're looking for is proof, and that doesn't exist one way or the other. There's no ironclad definitive about what this is. That's just true. The only real honest answer is I don't know. I don't understand why that's such a rough go for people to deal with. We started in Scotland, but we have moved on. Wait. If somebody's here from Scotland, if we give you super chat money, is it proof enough we exist? George Pagog, no. It's only proof that the simulation is providing me resources in this particular physical matter reality environment. Just saying. I'm not interested into listening religious on this channel. I'm not all that interested in going into it either, Black Power. So I feel you. Any minute now, he'll pull out his hurdy-gurdy and play us a tune. For Blogo Pogo. I don't have a thing to not believe in. I mean, literally, the idea of God is taught to us regardless of... Yeah, it's true. All that stuff is taught. But everything is taught to us. Everything. When I've had arguments with people who... one of my guys, and I was going to do a video on this today, where one of my nurses, and he says he's libertarian. He leans more libertarian, and he's like, we're talking, and we're like, yeah, man, we're waiting on Hillary Clinton to get indicted. We're having that conversation, and he says, between you and me, I think Trump is cleaning out the swamp, and my mouth hits the ground. We've been agreeing on like multiple items, and then he says that, and I'm like, come on, dude. It's like, why do you believe that? And we go into this conversation. Now, understand, his leanings politically, for the most part, are cultural. Like, there's no gap in between where he comes from to where he is now, which means there's little small permutations that are taught to him implicitly and explicitly, with a kernel of him interacting with those environmental factors that ends up with him being who he is. But after talking to him, I tried to make this point to him that there is a difference between government versus the people who are in government. Those things are distinctions. And because those things are different, and because those things there are distinctions in those things, that you can't necessarily castigate government for corrupt crooks who are in government. That argument worked. And he says, okay, you're right. Fair enough. And I said, if we weren't $20 trillion in debt, let's say we were, 20 trillion in debt like we are now. But let's say you had high healthcare, you had high-speed rail, your kids couldn't go to college when they wanted to go to college. Would you feel the same way? And he said, maybe not. He said, I just feel like nobody is looking out for Brian. And because nobody's looking out for me, why the fuck should I be paying anything into it? And at the very least, if Donald Trump burns it down, there's no difference because nobody was looking out for me. Now, that is magnificently selfish, by the way. He's not a bad guy, but that shit is magnificently selfish. But the point that he's making, though, needs to be adhered to and it needs to be paid attention to. He's literally making the point that if I thought government worked for me, then I wouldn't feel this way about government. And I've had multiple conversations where the argument boils down to they're all corrupt. Think about what's being said, though. They're all corrupt. And from their standpoint, even though they're all corrupt, at the very least, the Republican Party is trying to burn it down, and they're all corrupt. Think about the problem here, by the way. You have a Democratic Party. That Democratic Party has screamed at the top of his lungs that it is working for you, is working for the poor, is working for the middle class, is working for all these, the 99%. We're here to represent workers. We're here to represent the 99%. We're the Democratic Party. That's what we are here for. That's our banners. And you juxtapose that with the public who says, these guys don't care about the poor, and these guys are corrupt. And they're using this idea of identity as a way to essentially gain political clout and political power. And people are pissed off by it. Think of Russia for the moment, a Soviet Union. The Soviet Union went with this idea that they were a communistic state. Whether they were a communistic state or not is kind of besides the point. Some people make the argument they're state capitalism. Well, kind of besides the point. The argument that the West made was that's communism. And not just that's communism. Stalin was the identity of that item. And they tied all of the deaths, all of the murders that Stalin committed to the system to which Stalin was in. The problem with this is, now, when people bring up Soviet Union, the first thing they think of is communism and Stalin. Whatever virtues that was associated with the communistic systems was lost under this idea of Stalin, the narrative of it. The Democratic Party has gone with this idea that they are a representation of the working class, of the poor, of the 99%, and yet they had 8 years in office, not to mention another 8 years under Bill Clinton. And what did they do? NAFTA, crime bill. What did Obama do? He let houses go bust, throwing his body to protect Wall Street after this massive crash, protecting the drug companies, protecting the insurance companies, and this kind of weird utopian fetish of healthcare that didn't quite put the human at the center of healthcare. This is the party. This is what they are. And even if Hillary Clinton got elected, she would pass a tax cut. And even Obama put 80% of those ghastly Bush tax cuts, enshrined them into law. I guess I'm making this point that if that's your record, and you're talking about hope and change, you're talking about you represent the poor and you represent 99%. If somebody is looking at that and they said, these guys are fucking liars. These guys are liars. They're talking about they represent the poor and 99%. If you're representing the poor and 99%, then I want something else. If that's what it looks like to represent the poor, the 99% workers, then I want something else. And there were a lot of workers who said, fuck that, and went to Trump. You can't say they're all racist. What, 20-30% of those people that voted for Trump voted for Obama prior? I suspect that there are a lot of those people are kind of like my nurse who said, I'm sick of this. I'm done. These guys say they represent this. They don't represent this. I'm done. At the very least, Republicans, they may fuck me over, but they're honest about it. They look me in the eye when they're fucking me. But Bombard's body language got their account revoked. I don't know who Bombard's body language is. Trump got in on a protest vote. Well, yes and no. So you could have said the same thing about Hillary, by the way. I mean, if Hillary won, you could say Hillary got in on a protest vote. Yes and no. There are some who actually believe Trump is going to make America great again. Brian believed it. My nurse believed it. He believed it. I don't think he was lying to me. Him and I have had those conversations in the past. And there are some people who are susceptible to what they're saying. Republicans, like a strong man. That's just the way it is. Lefties tend to be like herding cats. Republicans fall in line. Even though those Republicans didn't necessarily like Trump completely, they did coalesce around him, so he got the majority of their support. The only thing you really needed to do was to press the vote on the left. It wasn't so much that it was a protest vote. I think it was more so this kind of depression of people, not to mention California and the way the Electoral College is set up, where you have all of these votes, but all of those votes are just in one state. So Hillary Clinton can win California by 10 million votes if she wanted. At the end of the day, the most that she was going to get was a certain number of votes. So he beats the stuffing out of her in every other part of the state, of the country. She wins by 3 million more votes, getting all of those votes out of California. And I think she ends up with like 4 million more votes in California, but he ended up more than elsewhere. Yes, it's a protest vote to some degree, but to some degree not. I guess I'm saying it's a little bit of both. You did have people who full well believed in the quote-unquote make America great again. You have some believers, man. The ACLU just bought the case of it into one state Supreme Court of the United States. Really? That's what Occupy Wall Street achieved. I reckon I'm gonna miss. Hey, thanks for stopping in, Stevie. Thank you for stopping in. In fact, guys, it's been like 2 hours, and I suppose I have like multiple shows. I have like 3 shows lined up. By the way, before I end, I am going to be on Fault Lines Radio. I got a call from a very nice young woman. Said she was manager of Fault Lines Radio, and asked me if I wanted to come down to Washington, D.C. to the radio station to do the show. I told him I would be happy to. It's with Ken Stranahan and Lee. I forget the other gentleman's name. I forget the other gentleman's name, but I want to find it on the next show. So I don't necessarily know when it's going to show, but I am going to have to drag my ass out of bed early on Monday morning. I will be there at 8 a.m. and I think it goes from like 8 to 9 or something to that effect. So I don't know if they do their show live, but if they do their show live, I will find the location and I would tweet that stuff out so you guys can look me up. So that should be fun. Alright guys, I'm going to end this here. I will see you guys probably in a few minutes. I need to get something to drink and we can keep this show ticking. I debate whether or not I should just do one long show or whether I should break the shows up in the way that I break the shows up. Breaking them up gives me a little bit of time to set up between the next show. But I've been debating. I've been thinking of how to make a show better. I guess that's what I always think about, how to make it better. Yeah, I ended here. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon or Super Cash. Thanks everyone. And by the way, Matthew B. Squad, Wesley Walker, and Matthew, thank you very much. I'm drinking my mojito while watching this video. Black Power. I thought you were leaving, Black Power. I thought you were leaving. You weren't into an esoteric conversation. Nah, I'm teasing. Enjoy your mojito. I don't know where you are, but enjoy your mojito. Those things are fucking awesome, especially if you can get a good one. I'm better off smoking my liquor as opposed to drinking it. It doesn't fuck me up as bad. So, I'll see you guys probably in like 15-20 minutes. Hope you guys can join me. Thanks, guys. Oh, by the way, Ben Norden is going to be on the show, and Beasley, the journalist. Both of them are journalists. Both of them are awesome journalists. And they're going to be on the show. Beasley is going to be on the show. Vanessa Beasley, I think, on the 23rd of this month. And Ben Norden and I, we're still trying to come up with a time for him to come on to the show. But both are really good guests. Beasley is going to discuss the Syria. She's been there, so she can talk about it far more and better than I can. I can only talk about it from a logic standpoint. And based on the information that comes up. But, you know, the information that comes up is always through a glass. It's hard to know what's exactly true, and this idea of flat fact is not always the easiest thing when it's filtered through all these different layers. But nevertheless, she's been there, so she can come back and actually give first-hand detail of what she experienced while she was there. And Ben Norden is just fucking awesome on all sorts of subjects. So he's a damn good journalist, and I see his work all the time. So both of them will be here in the coming weeks. Fucking A. Alright, guys. I'm still trying to get Tom Campbell, and I'm thinking about getting William Ballman, or at the very least send him a tweet out. Tom Campbell is a new agey NASA physicist. The man is fucking amazing. He answered one of my questions once, and I was on cloud nine, because during that time I was like at Alkali. It was like, God, this man is awesome. He looks like Jesus. He's fucking amazing. But no, Tom Campbell is fucking fascinating. And so is William Ballman. William Ballman has multiple books on out-of-body experience. And he's easily an authority on it, to say the least. There's a few, actually. But William Ballman, his books are really, really good. And he's absolutely fascinating himself. So both of those, I'm going to try to get one or both of them on the show for one of my 420 segments. So I'll end this here. Alright, guys. I'll see you guys in a few. Bye-bye.